Hi there, I'm Rob Poyton. Thanks for joining me today on World War II Part 2 on Dragon's Teeth Gaming Channel. Now, I've just mentioned on the fantasy playlist that I've been rummaging in the shed, which you know all about if you've watched my shed video. Basically, shed full of crap. It's all going to be cleared out and turned into a permanent gaming room. So I have made a start. We've got, they do a bulky waste collection once a year in the village. The council come out and take a lot of your bulky waste away. So the car, as we speak, is filled filled to the brim with a load of old stuff that's going to the bulky waste collection tomorrow. And as part of that, I was rummaging around and I found a mysterious blue folder, which, much to my delight, had inside several sets of rules, including my old original, or our old original, Middle-earth wargaming rules, which I speak about on the fantasy playlist. But also I found 4 sets of World War II rules that I'd sort of forgotten about, really. Well, one set I did mention when I was talking about skirmish gaming. This was the set I mentioned. We use these a lot. I found those ones, they're from Paragon. And also this set as well. These are by Bayonet Publications. These are really sort of 25mm skirmish type games. But the other thing I was into big time were battles with 1300 scale tanks. As I said before, I really like that scale because you get your individual tanks and vehicles. They're recognisable still at this scale, but you can have these huge battles. And one set of rules that we used to use, I think I mentioned, was this, Heroics and Ross, battles with micro tanks. Another set that I found that I'd sort of forgotten about, Kampfgruppe. So this is armoured warfare on the Eastern Front, so it's specific to the Eastern Front, and this was by the North London War Games Group. So I thought what I'll do today is 2 things. I'll go quickly through each of these rule sets because well, they're quite different, actually, quite different. Each has got some unique things about it, and some things that I like and some things that I don't like. And then I thought I'd take you through, because I also dug out all my old 1/300th armour. We'll have a look at some of my old models, and also a little while back I did buy some stuff from Heroics and Ross with the aim of rebuilding up my 1/300th armies. So, let's have a look at the rules first. So, Battles with Micro Tanks, published by Heroic and Ross, who of course are still making 1/300 scale tanks and many other things, I'm sure. Written by Martin Greenan, and these were published in 1975. So quite an old set of rules, and I believe they're American. In fact, if we go to the back, there's some information here. You'll notice, by the way, on these rules that the typing is very small. I have to put my glasses on for these. Again, my thanks to members of the Southern Maine Wargamers Association, whose long hours of playtesting helped formulate these rules. And there's an address there for Maine. These are the days when people used to put their address in rule sets, as we'll see. I guess if you had any questions, you could write directly to the author. I can't imagine anyone putting their real address in anything now, but I guess we have email. So the first thing we find out is that the basic ground scale is 1 inch equals 50 yards. The basic time scale is 1 turn equals 120 seconds, 2 minutes, which I think in World War II terms is quite a time when you think of the rate of fire of an MG42 or even a tank. 2 minutes seems quite a long game turn. And it says you can think that each unit represents 4 or 5, but this really works with using 1-for-1 vehicle scale. So 1 tank on the table represents 1 tank, whereas we'll see in other rules 1 tank on the table might represent 3 tanks. Of course, with infantry it's a little bit different at this scale. So your infantry squad of 10 or 12 men is represented by maybe 3 or 4 figures on a base. And I like this little paragraph here. When playing a micro armour wargame, it usually works best when a disinterested third party is used to settle all judgment disputes. This will help the game move along quickly with a minimum of disruption. I especially like about that the disinterested third party, like, you know, you almost sort of grab someone off the street or perhaps get your friend or partner to come along. I mean, I normally find any real arguments can be resolved by a dice roll, right? Then we're into our movement sequence. So we have 7 movement sequences here. Smoke, 1, 2, artillery and mortar barrage fire. 3, movement impulse. Now we have 2 movement impulses in this, which is quite interesting. So the first movement impulse, side A moves, then side B. Sighting challenge, visibility. Then we get regular infantry and machine gun fire, so machine gun fire from vehicles. Then we get tank, anti-tank, single artillery and single mortar fire, so that's more your direct fire phase. And then number 7, we get movement impulse number 2, where side B moves, then A. So this 2 movement impulse thing is quite interesting and quite different. And when we look at the back at the AFV charts, we see how this works, because the movement is different in each impulse. So if we take a Panzer IV-H here, for example, in the first impulse, its movement will be up to 2 inches. In the second impulse, the movement is up to 5 inches. So it's not like a 50-50 split, which is an interesting mechanic. Then we get into our actual movement rules, and they're quite detailed here. So obviously you've got your road cross-country kind of movement, but there's pushing and towing disabled vehicles, there's ramming, track hits, hedgerows, towing field guns, hills, woods, rivers, loading infantry in and on vehicles, unloading infantry. So quite a lot of different variables and situations just in your basic movement. There's also rules for things like roadblocks, barbed wire, and look at that, dragon's teeth, fame at last. There's also an equally detailed section on sighting and concealment. So you can set up with everything on the table, but of course you can also use counters, dummy counters for hidden movement as well, and that's where these sighting rules come into play. And again, quite a lot of information and detail. Anti-tank guns, which generally, certainly at the late stage of the war, would of course be concealed in ambush positions, woods, hedgerows, entrenchments, foxholes, buildings, and so on. From there we get into the, I suppose, the meat of the game in 1/300th, which tends to be centred on tanks. We get AFV fire. And it describes the firing procedure where we use 2 dice. Now this is unusual in that it gives hit probabilities in percentages. Obviously different types of guns at different ranges are going to have a different hit probability, modified by if you're moving, etc, etc. But maybe because polyhedral dice weren't a thing back then, you've got your hit probability, but you roll 2 dice and it tells you what numbers you need. So at, let's say 45%, you need to roll a 2, 3, 4, 5 or 7. Furthermore, you also get this odd little mechanic where you roll a white dice and a red dice or a coloured dice, and if the coloured dice roll is one of these numbers, that might have an extra effect. So if your red dice rolls a 6, then that is a hit to the track. If you roll a 5 to the front, it actually works as a bonus. You take -2 off the armour value of your target. So that gives you some nice little variables. Again, that's quite an interesting dice mechanic. I've not seen that before. And maybe that was just an early way of getting around the fact that we didn't have percentage dice, but you want to look at your probabilities as a percentage. Then we're into our HE fire, and it's all as you might expect. Direct, indirect, barrage fire, and you have your usual sort of barrage fire grid, or spider as they're sometimes called. So that's pretty standard. Rules covering mortars. And then we're into our infantry. So we've got small arms fire, machine gun units, mounted units, which of course was a feature of some theatres of war, certainly the Russian front. And then there's a look at our infantry anti-tank weapons, the bazooka, Panzerschreck, Panzerfaust, and anti-tank rifles as well. And then finishes with looking at things like rocket launchers, well, I guess your Navalwerfers or your Katyushas, pillboxes, and then it says unusual units. In these rules, the more commonly used units have been incorporated. There were, of course, several unusual and limited function units available. I guess that refers to things like your special forces units, maybe commando units, that type of stuff. And it really says, well, you make your own attack and defence values up for them. That's up to you to create those for yourself. There's some rules for smoke in this section, and then minefields. And the last thing we get is something that again can be a feature of 1/300th games, given the scale, even though most aircraft, if they're travelling, I don't know, even at sort of 200 miles an hour, are going to be on and off the table very quick. But we do have rules for aircraft, really for strafing. So it's fighter bombers, dive bombers and strafing, rocket attack or machine gun attack. So that really finishes it for the rules, and then we're into all our statistics for the various guns, various vehicles. Again, hit probability of each gun, whichever range, and the attack or armour piercing value, and your statistics for all your AFVs. What gun it carries, and armour values for front, side and rear, movement and weight. I'm not sure why the weight is included there. Maybe if you wanted to put in bridges perhaps. I mean, that was a feature of some battles, right? Particularly in the Ardennes. Can the bridge take the weight of your King Tiger tanks? And the second set of rules, Kampfgruppe from the North London War Games group, specifically for the Eastern Front. But again, 1/300th scale rules. Doesn't say when these were printed, but these are by Steve Tolk. And the first thing you notice is the type size here is much more forgiving for your eyes. These rules were originally conceived for 1/200th, though they can also be used with 1/300th. Now on here, your figure scale is 1 tank equals 3. So one model counts as 3. In fact, whether it be vehicle, aircraft or infantry element. This is quite interesting because they then give each model the chance to fire 3 times in a turn. And it says really the aim of this is to make a fast moving game without elongating the time scale. And then we're on to our scale. As we said, figure scale, one model equals 3 vehicles, 1 millimetre equals 2 metres, and one move equals 1 minute. So the move length here is half the length of the previous rules, but we are getting those 3 rounds of firing in. From there, we're straight into our movement. And I think it's fair to say there's not as much detail in these as in the previous set. It's your basic movement with deductions for different types of terrain. Or if you want to embus or debus infantry, that takes a third of a move, and so on. We're then into our spotting, location of targets, and we have a table here to check to see if you can see something. It talks a little bit about angles of vision. Obviously, if you're in a closed down tank, your vision is somewhat compromised. So you can only fire on something directly if you can see it. So from that section, we're straight into direct fire. And again, in a similar way, we've got all the types of guns down here, the range across the top, and the number you need to hit. I think this is 2d10, or I guess a d20. So again, I don't know the exact year of these, but we're in the era of polyhedral dice. If you get the hit, it's simply a matter of determining if you hit the side or the front, and then you check on the vehicle charts to see if the attack value of your gun is greater than the armour value of the vehicle. If it is, the vehicle's knocked out, so pretty straightforward there. But this is where I see, for me, this could get a little bit confusing, because of course if you knock a tank out, that is only 1 tank out of the 3, so the model stays on the table. Basically, you have to make 3 hits on one model to then take that model off the table. Now, it's been a long time since I played these, if in fact we ever played them back in the day anyway. So it strikes me that there might be a bit of record keeping there. You have to keep track of how many hits a unit has taken. Perhaps if you're doing the real big 1/300th games with potentially 40, 50 tanks per side, I could see that being a little bit time consuming maybe, or confusing. The usual rules for our indirect artillery fire. Again, we've got our spider or grid. Smoke is mentioned, and then we're into infantry action. And again, depending on what sort of section it is, rifle section, SMG section, machine gun, etc., etc., you've got your different attack factors at your various ranges there. But what we do have in this set are rules for morale. So each unit will have an attacking and defensive morale value. Obviously, the more veteran or elite the unit, the higher that value is. And there's your usual adjustments for number of casualties. Are you close to your HQ? Are you protected by AFVs and so on and so on. Basically, then you roll the dice and you have to get 8 or over to act as ordered. So that seems pretty straightforward and quite easy to use set of morale. The other thing we have in here is the idea of communications, because each unit has to have orders at the start of the move, and for those orders to be changed, you have to go through the communication network. So if you're in a company, you need to get in touch in battalion, who radio to regiment, who radio to HQ, or then radio out to the artillery battalion and company, and hopefully you get your barrage in the right place at the right time. Obviously that's something that didn't always happen. And there's a die roll for that, because of just to simulate that fact that things can go wrong. So I like that. I thought that was a nice mechanic. We get some quick rules on flamethrowers and minefields and that kind of thing. And then we're into our air attack again. So for dive bombers, we've got blast areas of bombs, and then we've got a nice firing ladder for rockets. So it's a bit like the gunnery spider, but this is for air attacks now. And to finish, we're into our data sheets. So this is Eastern Front particular, and it covers pretty much every, or certainly all the major armoured vehicles from the Russian and the German side, with all the relevant statistics. Final thing is similar stats for your ground attack aircraft. So as I said, there's some things I like about these rules. What I don't like that model represents 3 tanks thing, but the morale rules are very good. As far as the battles with micro tanks goes, again, a good set of rules, but some things I don't like about those. So what I could see me doing, if I was going to get back into 1/300 stuff, would be perhaps some sort of amalgamation of these rules. The morale rules from this, the firing rules from that, perhaps mix things up a little bit. I'm sure they would work very well together. So I managed to dig out some of my old 1/300th models. I'm sure I've got more stashed away somewhere. I seem to have mostly Russian here, though there's a couple of Panzer IIIs in there as well. T-34s, oh, and we've got a nice KV one there as well. And what I said, I do like at this scale that you can actually see what each AFV is, so you still get that character, if you like, with each of the model, but it allows you to work on a much bigger scale. And the other thing with this scale, because of that, I like the way you can build up your units. So you don't just have a couple of sections or a platoon of infantry and maybe 2 or 3 tanks. You can start building up your companies, your battalions, even your regiments, I guess, and so on. So I thought I would balance these sides up a bit, and I started ordering some other stuff. So I've got a lot of German models come in, including things like the half tracks to get the infantry around, and Panzer IVs. I'm not sure which model that is. It's got the skirts on, so I'm guessing maybe H. Of course, you have to have Tigers as well on the Eastern Front. So I guess I'll probably pitch the battles around 1944, so you get some of that interesting armour in. Of course, you need terrain to fight over for your battles, so I also bought some Russian buildings to set up villages. The rest of the terrain I'll probably make or buy some trees and that kind of thing. And I've also got several strips of infantry as well. These are German. It looks like maybe a flamethrower, MG, so maybe some sort of engineer unit there. And as I said with those other rules, we'll put 3 or 4 of these on a base to represent a section. Oh, some anti-tank guns as well. That looks like a Pack 40. So that's the 1/300th project. Again, the nice thing with this scale is painting is pretty straightforward. I mean, particularly for the Russians, everything's green. With the Germans, of course, you can get some more elaborate camo schemes, but in this scale, it's largely dunkelgelb, maybe with some brown or green stripes on. So not a lot of time needed on painting or on preparation and painting. There we go, 1/300th, that's another project on the boil. I think that's probably a little bit lower down on the list. My priority at the moment is the Age of Sail, the Fantasy and the Samurai, and then the 1/300th. I don't know how popular this scale is at the moment, how many people are interested in playing that, but nonetheless I will get all these painted up, and I will look at building some terrain for 1/300th scale as well. So just one more thing to mention before we go. I'd like to thank everyone who subscribed to the channel, and particularly those who have sent in comments. I had a couple of comments about bolt action, which you may remember I went through last time, and to my eye they looked very basic, and William kindly wrote in on YouTube, or he posted up on YouTube, to explain a little bit more about the rules. He said yes, they are quite basic, but he took me through how the activation works, and he mentioned about things like a 37mm gun is not going to be as effective as an 88, and so on and so on. So thanks for that, William, thanks for that correction. And also David at the club put a note up that he'd be happy to take me through a game of bolt action down at Bedford Gladiators at some time. So I'm certainly going to take him up on that, and if I can, I'll do a video of that and we'll put that up as a report in the future. So thanks guys, appreciate that. Appreciate any and all comments coming in. As always, please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.